Hello. What's up, E2 name? I'm trying something new today. I'm streaming on Twitch, YouTube, and TikTok at the same time. So we'll see how this goes. It looks like OBS is handling the bitrate. All good. So that's exciting. We're going to be doing some basics of Python today. I will be teaching the basics. We'll be going through this year's first Advent of Code Day. And I hope to go through all the Advent of Codes with this stream over the next month or so. I haven't actually been doing them yet this year. So this will be my first time seeing the problem as well. And unlike other years where I try to go as fast as possible and really speed run through it, this time I'm going to be trying to take it slow and explain everything. Yep, some stretching before a stream starts is always good. Yeah, we're really just going to be focusing on day one and teaching the basics of Python and kind of the mindset of how one should approach problems like this. Alrighty. Yeah, and it's going to be interesting. Maybe we'll get some chats from YouTube or from TikTok today. I'm interested to see if we'll actually get any viewers from those platforms. My first time streaming on both of them. It was quite a bit of headache to set that all up, but I think looks like it's all working. I think the internet connection's stable. Let's see. TikTok Studio says everything is good. So yeah. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, let's jump into it, guys. So, hello. Good to see you all. Thanks for stopping by. It's been a little bit. Life has been busy. But yes, it's time to do some chill programming. I got the lo-fi music going. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at Advent of Code. So, for those of you who don't know or might not have done Advent of Code before, it is a kind of yearly programming competition with all sorts of problems that start from kind of an easy difficulty and then get progressively harder. And the problems are nice, like they're well-designed problems, and they are kind of beginner level. Slightly more difficult because you need to know how to kind of organize your code. You know, it's not quite at the level of like you don't know any Python syntax, but they're pretty easy, and it's a good place to learn new programming languages or practice kind of algorithmic and data structure thinking. So we're just going to be going through this first problem, and I'm going to be taking it slowly. And if anyone has any questions, let me know. So now these are word problems. And whenever you're going through word problems, the first thing to note is that, you know, most of the words are not important. But let's go ahead and read it. I'll read it out loud. The chief historian is always present for the big Christmas sleigh launch, but nobody has seen him in months. Last anyone heard, he was visiting locations that are historically significant to the North Pole. A group of senior historians has asked you to accompany them as they check the places they think he was most likely to visit. As each location is checked, they will mark it on their list with a star. They figure the chief historian must be in one of the first 50 places they'll look, so in order to save Christmas, you need to help them get 50 stars on their list before Santa takes off on December 25th. Collect stars by solving puzzles. 2 puzzles will be made available on each day in the advent calendar. The second puzzle is unlocked when you complete the first, right? So each day has two puzzles. The second part of the problem is kind of a complication on the first part. Okay, so you haven't even left yet, and the group of elvish senior historians has already hit a problem. Their list of locations to check is currently empty. Eventually, someone decides that the best place to check first would be the chief historian's office. Upon pouring into the office, everyone confirms that the chief historian is indeed nowhere to be found. Instead, the elves discover an assortment of notes and lists of historically significant locations. This seems to be the planning the chief historian was doing before he left. Perhaps these notes can be used to determine which locations to search. Throughout the chief's office, the historically significant locations are listed not by name, but by a unique number called the location ID. To make sure they don't miss anything, the historians split into 2 groups, each searching the office and trying to create their own complete list of location IDs. Okay, that's reasonable, I suppose. Good job, historians. There's just one problem. By holding the 2 lists up side by side, which is your puzzle input, it quickly becomes clear that the lists aren't very similar. Maybe you can help the historians reconcile their lists. So they give you an example here of 2 lists of numbers. Maybe the lists are only off by a small amount. To find out, pair up the numbers and measure how far apart they are. Pair up the smallest number in the left list with the smallest number in the right list. Then the second smallest and the second smallest in the right list, and so on. Within each pair, figure out how far apart they are. You'll need to add up all those distances. For example, if you pair up a 3 from a 7, the distance is 4. 9 with a 3, it's 6. Okay, so that's an absolute value, right? In the example list above, and then they go through the example, but it's pretty straightforward, I think. So to find the total list, then add up all the distances, and that's the answer. So in all the advent of code problems, the answer is like a single number. And then this example is good to test your code. So you can import that in as like a string and read that in, or put it in a file and test against the example where we know it should give 11. But then what we actually have to try is the puzzle input, which is a much bigger file. So this is our puzzle input here. And we can see that it is a list of numbers where it looks like every single number is 5 digits long. Now, when we write our program, we can, make it kind of support all sorts of different list lengths, or like digit amounts rather. So with admin code, we have these big files. You could just grab all of this and paste it into like a giant string like that, but that's not very nice. Now we have 1,000 numbers here, so let's go ahead and move to Python, moved into our editor here. If you just put everything into a big string, that's pretty difficult to work with. So a little nicer is to instead make a new file. We'll call it day1input.txt. And you put the numbers in there without any special characters. Now we can just read this file. So in Python, in order to read a file, you have to open the file. So there's this open function that's built in. You can say day1input.txt, and we're in the same folder, so you could do this. Now, if you just ran this, it doesn't do anything. If you print out what this gives you, so the open function gives you this text.io wrapper. So once you open a file, you can do .readlines, and you can get all the lines from the file. Now, you're generally not encouraged to directly open and then read, because you're supposed to also remember to close it. Now, it will get closed when it gets garbage collected at some point, but the kind of more standard thing to do in Python is to use what's called a context manager. So you say with open the file as, let's say, our input file. So this will put in a variable called input file, and then you can say input file.readlines and throw that into a variable. So this is nice because as soon as you are outside of the with, as soon as you get to here, the input file will automatically be closed. So that's good. It's kind of the standard way you're supposed to do it. So at this point, if we print lines, you see you have this kind of interesting list of numbers, but they're actually strings. And then there's this like \n character. So let me explain a little bit what we're looking at here. So this is a list, as you can tell, because the first character is a square bracket. So lists in Python, look like this. But instead of being a list of numbers, it's actually a list of strings. And so each item in the list here is one of the lines from this file. So it includes the numbers on the left and the numbers on the right. And then it includes the special thing, \n, which is a new line character, which is what makes it go on to the next line. So we don't care about the new lines characters, and we need to separate the left and the right. So we can loop through the lines. So this will, sorry, like that. If you loop through it like this will go through each item in the list one at a time, and we can like print them out. But again, we need to separate the left and the right side. So these are strings. So that means that it is text, but we actually care about the numbers. So what you can do is you can split this line by spaces. Now, when you split it by spaces, let's see what that does. So that actually turns the string into another list. And you see on the left, we have the left number, and then you have these like empty items, and then you have the right number with the new line character. So these empty items, that's because actually we have multiple spaces in the middle here. Not one, but in fact, 3 spaces. So we don't care about the empty items. We only care about the first one and the last one. And then the last one, there's still this new line character. To get rid of the new line character, there's a simple trick we can use. We can trim it. Or I think it's called, it's not trim. It's, what is it? Python trim. It's strip. Yeah, in different languages it's called trim. But in Python, it's strip. That'll strip the extra white space at the beginning and end. So extra spaces. So if like on this last line, it started with some extra spaces, we rerun it, it still looks the same because we stripped the extra spaces, the extra white space from the beginning and end. So that gets rid of that. But it also gets rid of the new line character. So that's quite nice. Now, these intermediate ones, what are we going to do about those? Well, we are just going to ignore those. So we're going to take this, and instead of printing it, we're going to put this intermediate list into a variable. So we have parts. Now, parts is what we were just looking at. It's 4 things. If you want to check the length of it, you can use the len method, and sure enough, there's 4 things. That means we can get parts of 0 is the first thing in this list. Parts of 1 is the empty part. Parts of 2 is another empty part. Parts of 3 is the final part on the right. And then if you try to do parts of 4, your program will crash because there were only 4 items in the list. You might think, oh, 4 items, how come getting the 4th one doesn't work? Well, we start at 0. In all programming languages except Lua, which is a weird language, in all programming languages, for the most part, lists start at 0 indexed. So the last one in a 4-element list is actually the 3rd index, so parts of 3. Now, we don't actually want to kind of hard code the fact that there are 4 elements. Like, what if there were more spaces, or one of these lists was just shorter, but it was still kind of left aligned like that? So we don't want to, say, okay, give me parts of 0 and parts of 3. Like, sure, it works for this input, but it's not really nice to do that. It's not really like the best way to code it, the most robust way. If we got a different input, it might fail. Put // I love garlic bread real. Well, this is Python, so that won't work. Join from your short videos. Oh, cool. Hey, everyone. I see so many people hopping into the TikTok, so that's kind of cool to see. We can't use put. We have to use print, but we could put I love garlic bread. No Java. No, I have written a lot of Java in my career, but I hate that language. And I hope to never have to write another line of Java for the rest of my life. That would be quite nice. It is just too verbose and hideous. Nowadays I might write a lot of Python. I write a lot of C++. I write a lot of Rust. I write a lot of Lua now as well for evades. But yeah, no Java. But I do know a lot of Java. And I'll never forget it. System.out.println and all that jazz. Fortunately, Java was not my first programming language. Okay, so here, when we are doing this, like, yeah, that works. But again, we want to make it more robust. If we had like extra spaces here, then see this last one prints an empty one. So what you can do in Python is this will always be the first element of the list, but Python has a neat trick. You can do -1 will get you the last element of the list. A lot of programming languages don't have something like that, but what you can do instead is you can say length of parts -1. So remember, if the array or list, they're synonymous. If it has 5 items, the last element is the 4th index. So you get the length -1, and you go to that index, and that will be the last item. But in Python, yeah, there's a little shortcut for that, which is -1. So this gets us the left and the right side. Now, what you can do is we can assign these to variables. Left, right equals parts 0, parts -1. Now, the problem that we are solving is that we need to pair up the smallest number in the left with the smallest number in the right. So we have to store all of these numbers and then sort them. Now, sorting is like a whole thing, right? There's a lot of different ways to sort something. Lots of sorting algorithms. You've probably seen those cool sorting visualizers. Well, we're not going to have to implement a sorting algorithm from scratch. We will just do it in the standard Python sorting way. But in order to sort them, first we have to get them into lists. So we're going to have left numbers as a list and right numbers as a list. So this defines a new empty list. And then as we get this left and right, we're going to append them onto these new lists. So this will attach them onto these lists. So at this point at the end, if we were to print left numbers, it looks like a list like this. But again, it's a list of strings. And you have to be really careful with this, because if you were to sort a list of strings, it does not sort them the same way you would sort a list of numbers. Well, actually, in this case, because all of the numbers have the same number of digits, sorting it would work, though you do end up having to do math on it anyway. So it would be better... for the math part, you're going to have to turn them into numbers. So as we go here, we can actually convert them to integers. There are a lot of different data types and whatnot. Integers are just numbers without a decimal point, essentially. And Python is a really, really awesome language for doing these kind of coding puzzles or for like programming interviews. Python is a great language because the integers in Python, you don't have to worry about the range. All Python integers are what's called big integers, and they can represent any number. To demonstrate, let me show you 5, to the power of 2, 25, 5 to the power of 5, 5 to the power of 5,000. Absolutely massive number. Python has no problem calculating it. So Python integers are unlimited precision, unlimited range. In a lot of other programming languages, you might define a 32-bit integer and it wouldn't go past 4 billion. And so that can bite you. But in Python, you don't have to worry about it. It's a lot easier. Of course, there's some drawbacks to it. It's slower, but it usually doesn't matter. Okay, so at this point, we have left numbers and right numbers, and they're actually no longer strings. Now they're integers because we are casting it to an int. This turns it into an integer. So it takes the string, it reads it out, and it turns it into an integer. And so now we have left numbers and right numbers, but they're not sorted. And we have to pair the smallest on the left with the smallest on the right. So the easiest way to do this is you just use the sorted function in Python. And we're going to reassign that back to left numbers. And if you print left numbers, now it's sorted, where the smallest one is at the beginning and the biggest one's at the end. And now when you're starting out especially, the biggest thing in programming is like you want to run your program over and over, a little bit at a time, see what's going on, make sure you understand the execution. Once you get further in your career and you've been doing it a lot, you can write a lot more code before testing it and then just kind of test it and debug it. You know, sometimes I'll be coding for hours without running my code nowadays, but you know, it's harder to debug at that point. So it is nice to break it down into pieces. We're going to be sorting both of these lists. And then what we are tasked with doing in the problem here is pairing these up and then finding their distance. Now, what that means is just subtracting them and getting the absolute value. So that's pretty easy. That's built into Python, ABS. Hey, Yamber, how do I even say your name? Yamber? It's good to see you again. Yes, I'm doing coding streams. I'm starting today as the first one. We'll be going through all the Advent of Code problems over the next month or two. Yamber. Cool. Yeah, good to see you. So this is just day one, and I'm going slow. I'm explaining everything. If anyone has any questions, let me know. But so far, this is like pretty straightforward. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has about this or about computer science. Are you an engineer of some sort? Yeah, good question. So I am. I work full-time as an engineer at OpenAI. I've been a software engineer for, well, professionally for about 12 years, but I've been coding for about 20 years. And yeah, in my free time, I work on the game evades.io. But yeah, I've been a software engineer for a long time, and yeah, I work at OpenAI. This is my full-time job, which is really cool and very fun. This is awesome, dude. I recently finished my OOP Python course and got a B on it. Hey, that's pretty good. B's pretty good. So what we're doing now is we have to pair up these numbers. Now, when pairing up two lists and comparing things, you have to be careful. What if the lists are different lengths, right? If they're different length lists, then you wouldn't always have a number to pair up against the other one, and then your program might crash. But in this case, since we always have a left and right, we know that the length of the lists are going to be the same, and we can just, you know, confirm that assumption here. They are both exactly 1,000 items. All good. So now we will iterate through the lists. Now, if you did like 4 left number in left numbers, this is kind of similar to this loop here. This will iterate through the loop. Iterating means go through each element one at a time, and each element it puts into this variable left number. Well, that's great, but how are we going to get the matching right number? You can't just have like another loop like this inside the other one. I mean, you can, but that's not going to do what we want. This is going to, for each time we iterate through this list, it's going to iterate through the entire thing of this list. So we have 1,000. It'll end up iterating through this list 1,000 times, and we have like 1,000,000 iteration operations here. So that's not the right way to do this. Instead, what we really need is we need to get the index. So when you are looping through something that's like 1,000 elements long, and you want to have a number that goes 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way to 999, that's usually you put that variable in I. That's just kind of a convention. If you had another loop under it, you would put it in J, then K, and you go to Z, and then you give up because you run out of letters. No, I mean, you could, of course, go to II at that point, but hopefully you don't ever have to do that in your career. I have not had to ever do that. You, at that point, rethink whatever you're doing, because you're doing it wrong. But anyway, so for I and left numbers, this won't work either. Instead, you have to, because again, it will just put whatever is in each item into I. But we want it to go 1, 2, 3, or rather 0, 1, 2. So we turn it into, we get the length of it. Now, this isn't something that we can iterate through. So it'll be 1,000. So this is basically, it now evaluates to 4i and 1,000. Instead, we want it to be a list. So range is this really cool thing in Python, which takes a number, and it takes some other options too for like more complicated stuff, but it can, in its most simplest form, it takes a number and it turns it into what is basically a list that goes from 0 up to that number, which is exactly what we want. And so in this case, if we print these out, and let's get rid of these prints, we have I starting from 0 going to 999. And why is that helpful? Because now we can say left numbers of I and right numbers of I and get the ith number, the first one, the second one, the third one, and we get both of them and we can pair them up exactly like we need to for this problem. So that's pretty cool. Now, let's look at range if we just print out what range is giving us, you can see how it works a little better. It's this object. It's what's called a generator object because it is consumed lazily. So you can have like a range that's 10 billion long, and your program will still work. It doesn't need to pre-allocate the list. It doesn't need to create a list of 10 million things. Or you can make it a trillion things long. It'll still work because it's lazy. If you want to turn it into a list up front, you can. Just wrap it in a cast2 list. This will turn the range into a list, and you can see we have this big array of numbers now. Big list. I use array and list interchangeably because they are interchangeable. Now, again, for the problem, what are we doing? We are subtracting the left from the right, getting the absolute value. So let's move a little quicker through this problem. At this point, you just subtract these two. Now, this is not always going to be positive. A lot of times it's negative, but we just want the distance. And the distance, it's like distance from the center of the number line, right? It's absolute value. That's built into Python. ABS will just essentially remove the negative sign from us. If you don't have access to an ABS function for whatever reason, or you want to know how it works, it's basically the same as doing this. You get the difference, you put it in a variable, and if difference is less than 0, we make difference equal to the inverse of itself, negative difference. So if difference was -5, negative 5 is 5. That's the same thing as the absolute value function does. Another thing you could do is you could say difference equals difference times -1. That is the same. And there's a syntactic shortcut for that. You can say times equals -1. All of these will do the same thing. But there is an absolute value function. And so this is actually the distance. Now we are tasked with what specifically, once we get these distances, we want to get the total distance between the left and right list. And that's our answer. So let's go ahead and do that. We don't have to store these. We can just start with total distance is 0. And as we get these distances, we can just say total distance equals total distance plus distance. And whenever you have this like x equals x plus something, you can do plus equals total distance plus equals distance. And you could also, put this in one line if you wanted to, get rid of this distance variable, throw everything on the right there, and that would work too. And if we printed out total distance here, this should be the answer to the advent of code question. And we could just submit that. But if you wanted to be extra careful, for instance, if you are on a competition of some sort and you want to verify your answer, you could make some kind of a small test case that and try that instead. So let's replace this file with this tiny one that we know. The answer is 11, and we see that the answer was 11. So now we have more confidence. We run it again, copy that, put that in here, submit, and we can see we got it. We got it correct. 1 gold star. So that's great. But now they're going to ask us problem 2. Let's see what's next. Your analysis only confirmed what everyone feared. The two lists of location IDs are indeed very different, or are they? The historians can't agree on which group made the mistakes or how to read most of the chief's handwriting. Oh, they should try to read my handwriting. But in the commotion, you notice an interesting detail. A lot of location IDs appear in both lists. Maybe the other numbers aren't location IDs at all, but rather misinterpreted handwriting. This time, you'll need to figure out exactly how often each number from the left list appears in the right list. Calculate a total similarity score by adding up each number in the left list after multiplying it by the number of times that it appears in the right list. Okay. So for each one, we just multiply it over how many times it appears in the right list. Great. So in order to do this, what comes to mind immediately is use a hash map. In Python, these are known as dictionaries. And so this is a way to very quickly get, let's see, how can I explain this? It's what's called an associated array, where rather than going by an index into a list, we can get into it with kind of any key. Anything will point to something else. I feel like I'm not explaining this great. let's see. It's basically a map of one thing to another thing. So let me demonstrate. So here, this is the part 1 answer. Now we're just going to keep going. So what we want to do is, for the left list, we need to go through each number and figure out how often it appears in the right list. So in this case, we're going to be iterating through left numbers, and we're going to get each left number. And then we are going to be iterating through each right number. Now, immediately, this is like not a great algorithm, but I'm going to continue with it for now, and we'll optimize later because I am trying to teach basics after all. So if we just do this, then you could say, you know, if right number is equal to left number, then this is like a count of how many times we've seen it. If they're equal, we're going to add 1 to count. So similar to how we did here, plus equals, we can do count plus equals 1. So this will add 1 to count when it's equal. Great. And then we have the count, and what we're supposed to do is we want to get a similarity score. It starts at 0. Once we finish looping through the right numbers list, you would say similarity score plus, let's see, plus equals the left number times the number of times we've seen in the right list, which is our count. So that's basically the algorithm. And this probably actually runs quite quickly because it's only 1,000 items in the lists. So it runs 1,000,000 times. Computers are really fast. It can do 1,000,000 things very, very quickly. If we were to print the similarity score here, it's still finished super quickly. And we could try it on that example input. They say the answer is supposed to be 31. Indeed, we got 31. So yeah, that worked. And sure enough, we can go ahead and submit that answer. And we should get it correct. Yes. But we can optimize this algorithm. So let's go back and optimize this a bit more before we move on. So this worked, and it was fast enough because we had 1,000 items. But let's imagine that this was 1,000 times longer, 1,000,000. That means that we're going to have to do this loop a total of 1,000,000,000 times. It starts getting to some pretty crazy numbers. If it was like 1,000,000 times 1,000,000, yeah, it gets pretty insane. Actually, if it's 1,000,000, you have to do it 1,000,000,000,000 times because it's 1,000,000 times 1,000,000. So not a billion. So yeah, that becomes very slow. Which IDE is this? This is Sublime Text. Normally I use Cursor and I use a lot of AI powered tooling, but for the purpose of teaching, I'm just using Sublime Text that has very, very minimal IntelliSense and everything, because I just want to practice the basics. So this is just Sublime Text, very, very simple text editor. So how would we optimize this for really big lists? Well, one way that programmers think about things is what's called Big O notation. It's Python free software. Yes, Python is free and open source. You can install it on your computer, on Mac. There's even Python interpreters on phones, I think, though it's kind of difficult to code on a phone. But yes, Python is free. You're practicing for fun. That's great. Yeah, that's how you start. When I first started programming, I just thought it was a fun thing. I was like about 11 years old. I was just doing it for fun. Ended up becoming my whole career after I fell in love with it. Extra Patter on Twitch says, do it in Brainfuck. Yes, we could do these problems in Brainfuck. And you know what? After I do the whole month of admin code, maybe we're going to go back to try to solve it in Brainfuck. Though I think some of the problems might be a little bit too complicated. This one, I think you could potentially do in Brainfuck without too much difficulty, but like, I don't know how you would do absolute value. There's some difficulties. This one, you'd have to sort lists. Wait, sorting would be really difficult. Okay, we're not going to do that. We're just going to stick to Python. We're just going to stick to Python. I do love my esoteric programming languages though. Okay, so programmers often, when you are optimizing things, you can think in what's called big O notation. And it takes a little bit to understand how it works, but essentially, when you have a loop for x in list, this is what's called O of n, where how many operations, how many kind of general operations is it going to run? It's going to run n operations, where n is the length of the list. If you have a loop in a loop, and both loops are over the same list, right? You're looping over the same list twice with an inner loop. That's n times n, or n squared. Sometimes you can even have algorithms that are n cubed, or n to the fourth power. That's really bad. But n squared algorithms actually happen all the time in practice and production code. And sometimes they sneak their way into production code. No one knows they're there for months, and it's fine until you have a really big input, and then suddenly your whole system crawls to a halt and sites crash. There's been a lot of outages related to like n squared algorithms. And usually they can be avoided and optimized. Rarely, maybe it's still the optimal solution, but usually there's a faster algorithm. So in this case, this is n squared. So if n is 1,000,000, it becomes 1 trillion operations. So how can we improve this from n squared? Well, instead of going through right numbers every time, what if we can just go through right numbers one time and just store the counts of each number? So we can do that using a Python dictionary. In other languages, Python dictionaries are synonymous with maps, hash maps, associated arrays. It's all the same thing. It is something where we can put a number in, and then the number goes to something else. So like 1 maps to 2. So if we see the number 0 in the list, the first time we see it, we'll put a 1 in. The second time we see it, we increment it to 2, then a 3, then a 4. And then afterwards, we can just like look at this list. So we start it as an empty dictionary. We're going to iterate through right numbers here. And we are just going to say, if right number in counts. So have we seen it before? If so, then we are going to take counts of right number and add 1 to what is currently stored in there. So you see, we're using the right number as an index into the dictionary. This is the same syntax that we had with lists, but the difference is that we are indexing into dictionary. And so it's not actually like the position, it is this key maps to a number. If right number is not in counts though, we need to start it out at 1. This is because if you try to always do this plus equals, it will crash the first time saying, uh-oh, I don't know how to plus equals it, like there's nothing there yet. So we have to start with assigning it to 1. Now you might think like, oh, what if we start everything off at 0, but we don't know what all the numbers are yet. And it's kind of wasteful to like loop through it one time, set all the numbers to 0 or something. Like there's not really a good solution there. Now Python does have a cool thing in the standard library that makes precisely this problem easier, which is what's called the default dict for dictionary. It's in the collections library. From collections, import default dict, and then you can, instead of having this be a dict, you say it's a default dict that defaults to an integer. So as soon as you try to get something from this dictionary that's not there, it will default to an empty integer, which is when you call int on nothing, you get 0. So default dict will have zeros, and then you could simplify this to just that. Okay, but we'll just keep the code without default dict because you know, it's more straightforward here for teaching purposes. So this will then put all the counts in this counts dictionary. And if we didn't do any of the rest of the code here, let's just put it in a string. You could see that we have all these numbers and they have how many times they appeared. This one, for instance, appeared 9 times. All right, that's great, but it's not quite the similarity score yet. to get the similarity score, we're going to have to now loop through the left numbers. And what we need to do is we need to multiply the left number by the amount of times that it appears. Now, it's possible that it doesn't appear at all. So again, this is actually a place where a default dict would be nicer. So we'd say if left number in counts, then we'll say similarity score plus equals left number times counts of left number. This will be how many times left number was in the right list. And this is going to give us the same number we got before, 232289117. Now this algorithm will scale much better. So instead of being 1 trillion operations, if the list were both 1 million items, it will only be 1 million. Well, it'll be 2 million operations, but it's essentially O of n because it scales linearly to the length of the lists, and it won't have many performance problems. There are some other caveats to it. We have to remember more things. There's like a whole dictionary of all the numbers. So it takes up more memory. You know, that's something to consider. But this is a more optimal algorithm. Now, if we switch this to default dicts, the code gets quite a bit simpler. So let's make that change from collections, import default dict. This will be importing the default dict variable, or type rather, from this collections library that is in the Python standard library. And we will create this, and then the code is a lot easier. We don't need these if statements, and we get the same result. Cool. So this is like the right way to solve it. This is kind of the optimal algorithm that is O of n in big O notation. It's O of 2n, but when you're doing big O calculations, you remove like these kind of constant numbers. So it's just O of n. There's no way that you could possibly do this faster than O of n, because you have to look through the lists. You have to look through both lists at least once. I guess if you were trying to optimize it along with part 1, you could do something like, oh, as we are getting left and right here, immediately keep track of counts. You could do it like right away, and then you don't have to look through the list a second time. Yeah, that is a slight optimization, I suppose, but not really necessary. But yeah, this is kind of a demonstration of how we took a n-squared algorithm and we turned it into O of n. So that is day 1 of Advent of Code. This was our n-squared algorithm. This is the O of n algorithm. So that's good. Pretty easy problem. Advent of Code always starts easy and then gets a little crazier. Any questions so far? How's it going, chat? How's everyone doing? Y'all enjoying the live stream? This is my first time actually streaming live on a Twitch, YouTube, and TikTok at the same time, so I'm glad it's going pretty well. Yes, you have many questions. Okay, I will have many answers for you. Hit me. I'm happy to answer all the questions. How can coding be useful for the daily user? Well, that's a great question. If you are not working as an engineer, you might be wondering, like, yeah, how can I use programming to help me with my life? So personally, I use programming all the time, making little one-off scripts to do things like manage media. You know, you could be like re-encoding videos, things like that, or just kind of organizing data, crunching numbers, figuring out kind of like financial stuff, doing math, setting up, you know, kind of little automations and tasks. Is software free or does it have a subscription? So all the software I did today on stream is free. Python is totally free and open source. Anyone can write Python code. There's no subscription to it. This text editor I'm using technically isn't free, but it has a free version that's just as good. The only downside of the free version is that in the title bar it says unregistered, but otherwise it works fine. There's all sorts of free text editors, Notepad++, even Cursor and VS Code and all that. VS Code is quite nice. Those are all totally free. Yeah, don't pay money for, you know, things that you don't find useful. There are some very useful things with subscriptions like ChatGPT and whatnot, but yeah, Python and writing software is totally free. So yeah, you can use Python for anything, just kind of like doing analysis on data, stuff like that. I'd say if you want to do those kind of tasks, it's good to kind of work through it with ChatGPT. Is quite useful. Inbox me when you have a chance to useful software. I mean, there's everything in the world, man. Just there's everything. Everything's useful, and some things are not so useful. But it's whatever you want to do. It depends on your life. It depends on what your priorities are, what kind of tasks you have in your daily life, right? Like for me, I'll be trying to like optimize, vacation prices, things like this. I'll pull the data in and make a spreadsheet and, do some kind of logic on that. Yeah, there's all sorts of things like that. Your recommended software, I don't know, again, it depends on what you're doing, but, the Google suite of tools, Google Sheets and Docs and whatnot are quite nice. I use a lot of AI tooling, ChatGPT and whatnot. So yeah. All right. So yeah, I think, I just kind of want to do one Advent of Code problem per day to keep the stream focused. And I do, I can't be on super late because I have to go back to work in the morning. But, I'll be on for another like 10, 15 minutes and to answer any questions folks have. So yeah, let me know. Let me go to my full screen cam and I'll just answer questions and stuff. If anyone has any questions about computer science, programming, career advice, really anything, happy to answer. I guess I should just talk about some things that I found useful in my career. So, I've been programming for 20 years, and it's something that I've found I was like very good at it, and I was very passionate at it, and it was kind of came natural for me to pivot into making that into my career. But I can tell you that the first couple years that I was doing it, it was not so easy, and it never is. It is a totally different way to think, like a completely different way to reason about things. Thinking about coding and doing coding is so different from kind of day-to-day activities. It's like very mental. It takes a lot of visualization. It takes a long time to really understand the program, to make the mental model. So like, for example, we'll have, let's just move down here. You've got some code that says like x equals y plus 1 and you have -5 or whatever, and you'll have like y is something. Well, you have to develop that mental model that like substitutes things, like to understand, oh, what's going to happen is this y is going to become the value 5 when it runs, and this is going to become 6, and then this is going to become 1, and then x will be set to 1. Like you have to understand the order of operations that happens. And this isn't just in mathematical expressions, but if you have like a loop like we did earlier for I in len of, some list, you have to understand what's happening here too. Is like, okay, the first thing is that this evaluates to turn into the length of the list, maybe 1,000. And this turns into your kind of range object, which is essentially a loop it's a list from 0 to 1,000, but kind of lazy. And then what happens is it starts running in here where I starts at 0. It's going to run all the code in here and then go back up and I will be 1. I'll run all the code in there, then I will be 2. Like it takes a while to develop that mental model of what happens in the life cycle of your program. Because eventually you should be able to take kind of any program and be able to read it and look at it and have a prediction of what's going to happen and kind of understand the process of it. It's a very methodical, step-by-step kind of way of thinking. And a lot of times your assumptions will be completely and totally wrong, especially when you're starting out. You don't know anything, you are just a beginner and you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and there's going to be a lot of things that are just absolutely magic. Like, you have no idea how it works under the hood. You don't know what's happening. Python, it runs and it works and your code runs. Like, what is actually happening on your computer? It takes like years of kind of digging in and like slowly demystifying the magic until it finally clicks, like, oh, I see, there's a Python interpreter and it is turning the Python into, bytecode and all of these kind of layers that are happening. And eventually it translates into, the machine code and all that, right? Where do you begin? Is there a formula to begin with? Well, I think that's one of the most complicated things in computer science, or one of the things that really catches a lot of people. They're like, oh, where do I start? Like, what language do I start with? Where do I start with? Because there's so many different ways to approach it. Like for me, the first thing I ever did was just kind of making some basic HTML sites. And then one of my first languages was ActionScript. Actually, back in the days, like 2004, I did a little bit of ActionScript and made some like simple animations. And I went from there to the basics of C++, and that was like my first real language was C++. But a lot of people nowadays start with Python. I think Python's a good language to start with. Hey, Kirich, good to see you. I think Python's a good language to start with for sure, though it does hide a lot of things from you. So if you're starting with Python, you don't really know how the data types are represented under the hood. You don't really understand the memory model of the thing. If you're starting with C, it's really hard to start with C because it is a hard language to write. But I think starting with C gets you a really good model of the memory and all that. Yeah. You're behind on AOC by 2 to 3 days? Well, Kirich, I just started, so I'm going to be trying to do this stream pretty much every day and go through like a problem a day. But yeah, we just did day 1. But yeah, to answer your question, like, where do you begin with programming? I mean, I would say starting with Python's a good place, just kind of making basic console apps, trying to make like an interactive tic-tac-toe game, something like that. I think that's good. If we, a little tic-tac-toe program is not the very first program you should do, but it should be something you can do after about like a month or so of Python. Tic-tac-toe, what do you got? You got this grid of like X's and O's, right? But they're blank at first. So, and it's 3 by 3, right? So you have this grid, you would initialize it. So we're going to create, let's say we'll start them at none, which is a special object in Python. So at this point we have this grid, it's 3 lists of none, none, none. And then you would say, you need to ask the user, you got to get input. Where would you like to move? And maybe it's like, row, column is their input, right? So we'll ask them that question. And can I do input here? How does that work actually in Sublime Text? I never tried to get user input in Sublime Text. Where do I type? It doesn't seem to... I never tried that before, but you would do something like that, and then you take the response and you parse it the same way we did string parsing here. Splitting, if it's wrong, you have to tell the user, oh, try again. You loop through it, you update the grid, you display the grid. That's kind of a basic thing. Then you can move on to something a little bit more complicated. You're on the leaderboard. Oh, that's cool. I won't look on stream if you dox yourself, Kirich. But you could do like a basic tic-tac-toe. You could move on to something a little bit more complicated. You could implement Connect 4. That's actually a good one. Connect 4 is very interesting and a common interview problem, I'll say. And then you could move on to like more complicated things. You could make a console version of chess. That was one of the things I did in my first year of coding. I made a little console game of chess. It was about 900 lines of C++. And that was very interesting. No AI, right? No chess logic. It was just player versus player. But that was, pretty good. Oh, hey, thanks for the hearts and the GGs, Spunky. I think, do I have those displaying properly on TikTok? I think I have the things set up in my scene, right? Alert. Yeah, they should have showed up. Thank you. This is all very complicated with the TikTok stream because I've got like OBS and like vertical. I've got like different vertical streams and all that. So it's all quite complicated, but it looks like I think it's all working. I think it's all working well. Anyways, you kind of move on through these levels and you slowly do more and more complicated things. You learn about, functions and reusing code and making multiple files. And eventually you move on to things that are quite a bit more complicated, like, making whole games and whatnot. So, I have the game, here, let me show you guys my game. So this is all written in Python 2, called evades.io. So this game is all Python on the back end. All right, see you later, Spunky. This is all Python, multiplayer game. You can, move around and die and things like that. And it's just like, you can do anything with pretty much any programming language. Join some people who are playing right now. Multiplayer game with chat and everything like that. Python 2? No, Python 3. Python 3. Yeah, Python 2, TOO. Yeah, so this is all written in Python, and there's an insane amount of code for it. But yeah, it's anything is possible. And the longer you code, the more you realize that's true, that anything is possible. One piece of advice that always helped me grow as a programmer, as a person, as someone learning, was to always pick my next project based on something that I had no idea how to do. So I would pick something that is just kind of beyond the horizon of what I know, right? So like, I'm really good at this kind of stuff. So next project, I'll do it in a new programming language with a new framework, or, just have some extra challenges that are like, wow, that's going to be really hard, right? So I made like a hardware music visualizer once. I didn't really know where to start, right? But eventually, as you go, you break it down into smaller problems, you break it down and you figure it out and you get better. And the horizon of what you don't know shrinks and shrinks and shrinks, and you realize that there's really nothing that you can't build, nothing that you can't accomplish. Of course, some things are incredibly difficult, but I think we'll see this more and more over the next few decades, but I think computers can pretty much do anything. So yeah, it's like a powerful thought, and I think that's one of the things that really drew me to programming from an early age, was how empowering it was. I was someone who is, very shy in school and didn't have that many friends or anything like that. I mean, I had a few, like I wasn't, unpopular, I'd say, but I was just kind of a shy kid, and I wasn't good at any sports or anything like that. I mean, I was pretty good at dancing, but programming was the biggest area in my life where I realized, like, wait, I can make things that people care about. Like, I can make people happy. I can bring a smile to people's faces. I can have an impact. I can have a meaningful impact and be cool and do cool things. And so it was very empowering. And, that feeling is one that I think has kind of carried me through my career. And I think it's something that, is really important. And I don't know if that is universal amongst programmers. I don't know. But for me, that was a very, very motivational feeling. And so I always wanted to build things in a way that, like, I proved to myself, like, I could do it, that, like, this is an awesome thing that is going to be, like, is impressive even to myself. And so that always motivated me. So yeah, I guess those are some bits of advice I have. I will be back doing this again tomorrow. I'll go through Advent Code Day 2, and tomorrow I should start the stream a little bit earlier. I will start earlier and go through admin of code day 2, and then maybe, I don't know, maybe we should do something fun with it. Like we do it in Python, we do the basics in Python, and then we solve it again in like some crazy way, some esoteric programming language or something. That could be pretty fun. Maybe we'll do that. Probably not brainfuck, because that is a little bit too difficult to solve some of these in. Especially reading the file is pretty much impossible in that language. But I don't know. Maybe we'll do it in some interesting way. I'll think of something. We could also, you know, we can, yeah, Java. No. Or maybe it would be fun to see how AI does on these problems. I mean, I think AI probably solves these problems incredibly easily. Let's test that here, actually. If we were to give this this whole question here to ChatGPT. Oh, let me here, one sec. Yeah, I know half the leaderboard is AI. So that was the, sorry. That was the reason I didn't really, I messed up my scene. That was the whole reason I didn't really compete on the leaderboard this year, is because AI assisted answers, or like fully automated with the AI APIs, are going to be dominating the leaderboard. They were already doing it last year. So no surprise. But yeah, if we were to like try this in ChatGPT, we just paste this entire problem in, and then we can give a little bit of context. Well, let's try first with no additional context and see what it says. So it immediately just like put the answer into Python, and then, you know, it's going to get 11. So there you go. But if we wanted to actually use this program, you might want to say, you know, read your input from day1 input.txt. So now it's going to crash. It's trying to run the program, and that's going to fail. But we could run this program right here, and you know, it didn't actually print the total distance. But yeah, if we printed, we get the same right answer. I think, yeah, the same number. So, you know, of course it worked. Now, its solution is kind of interesting. Oh, I just realized on my Twitch stream I wasn't showing the ChatGPT window. My bad. But yeah, it wrote the answer there. I just told it to read the input from the file. But yeah, what its solution was is pretty similar. It does the read lines. What do you do? So for my full-time job, I work at OpenAI as a safety engineer on the safety engineering team. I'm a software engineer. I've been coding for more than 20 years. And on the side, I work on games like Evades.io. Oh, yeah, no, Kirich. I mean, I think there are some people that can solve these problems in like half a minute. Like this day 1 problem, I think you legitimately can solve it in half a minute. You can solve this in like 2 or 3 lines of Python if you do things like this, right? And there's like competitive programmers who can do these kind of things very, very quickly. So I think like day 1 you could solve in like half a minute, then like another half a minute for part 2. But if we look at the actual leaderboard, um, 9 seconds. Yeah, like that's AI, right? There's no way. I can't imagine 9 seconds. 4 seconds for part 2. Oh no, 4 seconds for the first part. 9 seconds for both. Yeah, like there's no way, right? Oh, you can't see again. I'm so bad at this. I'm getting used to my new layout here. Trying to find one layout that works on Twitch and TikTok vertical at the same time is very difficult. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I think some of these are definitely AI, but I think some of them are legit. Yeah, with the like ChatGPT API, you could obviously solve these like incredibly quickly. Why did you decide to switch to TikTok? You know, I'm just trying to branch out to a new audience, hoping to have some people discover me from TikTok and, you know, maybe stop by my Twitch streams in the future and whatnot. Twitch doesn't have very good discoverability, so I'm just hoping to have some new faces. TikTok's a cool platform. Yeah, thanks for the like. I will be posting some like videos on TikTok too, probably like highlights from streams like this in the future, and other things, answering people's questions. So I don't know, just trying to branch out as a content creator. Anyway, let's analyze this solution ChatGPT wrote. So same idea, you read the lines, you create the lists, you iterate through the lines. And now this is kind of a cool idea where you map. Okay, so you split the line into all the parts, and then for each one you turn it into an int. Now, when you just do line.split like that, right? Oh, that's interesting. So versus line.split on space, which has these empty ones, when you split with no args, it automatically gets rid of the empty items. I didn't actually even know that. How does that work? Python split line. Let's read the... Let's see. Default separate is any white space. So I guess all the white space just gets removed there. Huh. Okay, so that's a cool little trick there. And then they put it into left and right list. They sort them. Oh yeah, that's true. Instead of doing sorted, you can just do dot sort, which is the same thing. And then calculate. Well, this will actually be slightly better, I think, because it'll sort in place. Not usually important, but yes. And then finally, what's it do here? It does the sum of the absolute value of the difference for every L and R in the zip. So zip is a cool thing in Python that I never actually end up using in practice, but it creates a kind of a zip generator. We'll evaluate this to a list. It's a list of tuples for each pair in the left and the right. So that's kind of a nice way to then be able to iterate through the left and right all at once. So okay, pretty cool trick. Do it in one-liner versus our implementation. A equals a dot sort. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I just did sorted. We found it after 3 months. Oh man, yeah, allocating a whole new list. Well, actually in Python, if you do a equals a dot sort, it'll still sort it in place, and then the a is just a reference to the result of that, so it doesn't actually allocate anything new, but it is unnecessary. Yeah, it wouldn't actually have any performance cost in Python. Now, if you want to actually get a new list, you can do this little trick. That'll get you a copy of the list, not just a pointer. But anyways, yeah, so this was our original implementation. Now let's see what happens when we ask ChatGPT for part 2. It's like, oh, I'll process it for you. No, it's fine, I got it. Let's ask it part 2 and see what it says there and how that differs. Just for fun, let's compare the AI answer to my answer. So, okay, it uses the counter in collections. Now, I did consider that, but I was just teaching how dicts work. Yeah, so there is a counter which will automatically count how many things you put in there. So they just initialize the counter, give it the entire right list, and then if you say like, okay, counter of 5, that will be the amount of times it had the number 5 in the list. So they just do num times the right list count of num for num in left list. Now counter is effectively the same as doing this default dict and like counting it yourself. Like this will have the same exact runtime. Counter might be slightly faster if it's implemented in C, but it probably isn't. I don't think it is. So yeah, that won't be any faster. And then they just do this sum in one. So num times right list count for num in left list. It was not exactly Python, it was in pandas and it returned none. Oh, interesting. Interesting. I managed to avoid using pandas my whole career. Luckily. Haven't had to use it. Now if we tried, so like this here, this code here, you can put this into one liner the same way. So like similarity score can be equal to the sum of left number times counts of left number for left number in left numbers. So you could do it like that, and it's kind of a long line, but yeah, this will work. So this construct here, we can split it over multiple lines, but this is what's called a list comprehension. So it's kind of doing like a for loop, but without, like, in one line. So if you were to break this out a little bit more and just like print this part out, you see you get this generator object. So list comprehension gives you a generator. This is similar to how range and the zip give you like these kind of weird objects. They're lazy evaluation objects. You could convert it directly to a list, and then you can see that this is what it looks like. So this is the result of this loop. And so it iterates through this, and then the actual thing that it outputs is what's on here. So it's using this variable and using it here. And then sum will just take a list, or a generator in this case. It'll take this kind of iterable object and sum up all the numbers in it. And so you can get the whole answer in one line. And so that's what ChatGPT ended up doing. But, you know, the code we did with the for loop is no worse than that. Same performance. So, yeah. Pretty cool. Yeah, pretty much all the advent of code problems, and I'm sure AI can do at this point. AI has gotten quite impressively good at programming. But if you are learning to code, I don't recommend leaning on ChatGPT that much, because it will make it harder for you to learn the basics. I mean, you can ask it questions, you can have it like tutor you and whatnot, but if you are just pasting in your homework questions of programming into ChatGPT and then taking its answers and submitting those, you're not really practicing coding. So it's going to be difficult to learn. But I think it's a great tool. I use it constantly, you know, for my job and for my side projects. I love it. It's great. But yeah, just be careful not to lean on it, especially when you're learning, because it does make mistakes too. And so if you aren't an expert yet, you won't be able to spot those. Use it to explain some meta about the code, not the code itself. Yeah, you could do that. Ask questions about things. Hey, Steffers, thanks for joining the TikTok. Yeah, you could use it to answer some questions, things like that. Just kind of explain things, and you can use it to help learn. But yeah, just don't rely on it too much. Like, you know, some people think it's like infallible or whatnot. Like it's not. It will make mistakes. Its code won't always work the first time. And when you are a noob at coding, you might not understand why the code doesn't work, and maybe it just gets stuck like that. Though, I mean, honestly, most of the time you can just ask it, fix the code, and go back and forth a few times. But, you know, you gotta be really careful. I'll tell you all a funny story about one time where I bricked one of my laptops. It wasn't that big of a deal because I was already moving on to a new laptop. Like, I was reformatting and whatnot, but I accidentally bricked my laptop because of ChatGPT. This happened like 6 months ago or so. It was pretty funny. So this was a MacBook. Was it a MacBook? No, this was a Windows subsystem for Linux. So it was kind of like a Linux environment. And I was going to recreate it. And so I thought, okay, let's back up everything I wanted to back up all of my directories that had like source code of my projects and whatnot. I wanted to back them up and put them into an archive file before I recreated it. You know, basically zip it all up. And so I thought, okay, this is kind of like an interesting little one-off script. Let's have ChatGPT just write me a bash script that does this. So I said, hey, ChatGPT, I'm backing up my computer. Well, I think I didn't even say that. I said, write me a script that goes through all of my files, starting from like from the home directory, or like all the way from the root directory. Go through all the files and zip them up. You know, put them in an archive recursively, right? And I thought it would go and like put them all into kind of, you know, an archive all together. And that's what I intended. It did not interpret it that way, however, and it wrote me a script, and I kind of skimmed it over like briefly, and I was like, okay, looks fine. But I really didn't, I wasn't paying attention. I don't know, I was having an off day. Didn't really read the script carefully. And then what ended up happening was I ran it, and like immediately after, everything, like all shit went crazy, and my computer wasn't running, it wasn't working anymore in the right way. And I tried to like stop it, and I started getting all of these error messages. I'm like, what happened, right? Well, the script, what it actually did was not back up everything into one central archive, but rather it took every single individual file and zipped it up, and then replaced the original file with its zipped version. It zipped the files into themselves, making them, you know, when it comes to executables and everything, they were not working anymore. And I tried to recover it, but it was impossible. Luckily, I didn't lose anything important. But yeah, you have to be careful when using ChatGPT writing code. You got to double check it. You got to make sure it is not something that could actually break anything. You know, anytime I do use ChatGPT to write a lot of code now, I write a lot of tests around it and kind of validate everything is working correctly. If I'm having it like optimize some code that exists, which is something I use it for a lot, I will first write tests that show how the code is currently working, then make the optimizations and make sure that it's still working exactly the same way. And you know what? I'll tell you what, a lot of times it changes. Is a new engine expected? For evades, I will be, yes, I am moving evades to Unreal Engine. That is a work in progress. Sudo GPT written code.py in prod. Yeah, for sure. Hey, you know, you can run Python files directly if you make them executable, and at the top of the file, you put the shebang line, you know, shebang Python, like that Python, then it will execute. Yes. Yeah, so anyways, that's a little bit of that, but I think I will be going to bed now. So thanks everyone for tuning in. I'll be back tomorrow to do Admin Code Day 2, and I don't know what I should do to make it like more interesting or more funny, or, you know, after I do it in Python, we do something kind of interesting with it, do it in some weird language or something. Yeah, I wish I could do it in like Minecraft Redstone or something. Hey, thanks for the follow, Mr. Jokero. But yeah, I think I'll just I'll end there. Don't read the text at all. You communicate with Alan. He is your fan. I've talked to him before at times. All right. Well, thanks everyone for watching. I'll be back very soon, and I'll do a longer stream next time. So yeah, I think this was successful. I'm streaming on Twitch, YouTube, and TikTok. Well, YouTube I wouldn't say is that successful because no viewers came in at all on YouTube. So I don't know. I think YouTube has like no discoverability. Maybe it's not worth streaming to YouTube. I don't know. But they do record the videos better, I think. So that's fine. But TikTok was nice. A bunch of random people stopped by. So that was cool. That was cool. Good to meet you all. Okay. With that, I will be ending. So Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.